Hello everyone, welcome to today's video. It is time. The ultimate matchup, the duel of the century, the clash of the titans. PlayStation 4 Pro versus PlayStation 5 Pro. Two professionals going head to head. Which one will be the winner? I'll leave it up for you to decide. In this video, I'm going to match these consoles up in some categories to see what they did differently and how well they did it. Are these consoles able to justify their own existence? We're gonna find out. Without further ado, my fellow gamers, let's get it on! And if you want to subscribe, that's cool too. Feel free to do that. Let's get it on! Entering into round one, we have our first category, and that is the point. What was the purpose of these pro consoles? What problem were they trying to solve? Let's take a look at the first PlayStation 4 Professional, shall we? The base model PlayStation 4 released in 2013, and it was around this time that majority of households had HD televisions. But it was also around the same time where a new TV began rising up into the market, 4K televisions, boasting 4 times the resolution of standard HD, and a lot of these TVs also came with HDR, which was high dynamic range, allowing for a wider color spectrum and more detail in your bright and dark areas. Needless to say, these TVs began to hit mainstream, and with streaming platforms like YouTube, Netflix, and others beginning to support those 4K video streams, it was official that we had quickly moved on from the HD era and immediately into the 4K era. The one issue here is, the PlayStation 4 can only output at 1080p standard high definition. But Sony wanted to provide those who purchased those shiny new TVs with a great gaming experience. So what do they gotta do? They gotta make a console capable of 4K, baby. With a beefed up GPU, this PlayStation 4 was ready to render those games at a higher resolutions, and let me tell you, the first time you're playing a game at a higher resolution, that's quite the feast for the eyes. This was also the first time on console where we had graphic mode options. Depending on the game you would play, you were able to choose between games prioritizing resolution or higher frame rates. So the PlayStation 4 Pro point? Enabling 4K gaming for users with compatible displays. Next up, the PlayStation 5 Pro. Now this one is a bit more complicated. The base PS5 released in 2020 came 4K ready and was backwards compatible with the PlayStation 4. Playing a lot of games at higher resolutions and frame rates. Not to mention, most games releasing on the PlayStation 5 had adopted the resolution or frame rate modes that began with that PlayStation 4 Pro. So we had 4K, and a lot of 60 FPS games. Hell, we even had 120 FPS gaming, which was incredible, and it was the first time we had seen high frame rates on a home console. So what is the PlayStation 5 Pro bringing to the table? What problem is it solving? Like I said, it's complicated. Depending on who you ask, there is no problem that needed solving here. But the PlayStation 4 Pro entered the ring with one big promise, and that was enabling that buttery smooth 60 FPS gaming without the compromise of a lower resolution on your games. And how does the PlayStation 5 Pro aim to achieve this promise? Well, by using AI, of course. The launch of the PlayStation 5 Pro also brought about something known as PlayStation Spectral Super Resolution, or PSSR. This AI algorithm upscaler would work similar to FSR and DLSS and be Sony's own in-house upscaler. Using this technique to render games at lower resolutions to achieve those frame rates and then upscale back to 4K image quality with AI. Most people would say their games on base PS5 already looked amazing in performance mode, but as the generation has gone on, we have begun to see newer games struggle to hit their 60 FPS targets. And worse off, if they did attempt for 60 FPS, it would look like someone smeared a bar of soap over your screen. Not a very pretty sight to behold. So the PS5 Pro is potentially an answer to those issues. And there we have round one complete. We understand why these consoles were created and what they aim to do. In order to do these additional graphics rendering though, we needed some more horsepower. These are professional consoles after all. So how different do these Pro console specs look when compared to their base model counterparts? Let's find out and ring the bell for round two. Round two, specifications. Starting off with our PlayStation 4 Professional, as I discussed, this console needed to bring the pixels, and in order to do that, we needed a decent boost in power. And let me tell you, this console saw a big jump in GPU power, especially when comparing to its base model counterpart. The base PS4 came packing an AMD Radeon GPU with 1.84 teraflops. The Pro, however, came with a whopping 4.2 Tflops. It's quite demanding running games at higher resolutions. The CPU, on the other hand, would stay mostly the same but allow for higher overclock speeds, with the base model running a CPU clock speed of 1.6 GHz compared to the Pro's 2.13 GHz, allowing for improved streaming in open world games. Now, being a professional console also meant more storage, being packed in with a 1TB hard drive, and we also saw a boost in RAM speed, with a 24% increase resulting in a total of 218 GB a second, compared to the base PlayStation 4's 176 GB a second speeds. Now, the PlayStation 4 Pro came with quite the upgrade, and I keep mentioning this allowed the console to output 4K gaming. But I'm going to stop here and do a quick mention to one thing about the PlayStation 4 Pro that in my consideration is a huge miss, and that would be not including a 4K drive. You see, the PlayStation 4 still uses the same Blu-ray drive similar to the base PlayStation 4, meaning this box can't play 4K discs. Sure, not a huge deal at the time seeing as PlayStation 4 discs were on Blu-ray, but still. The fact of the matter is these games looked way sharper on the Pro, and it was all thanks to this substantial boost under the hood. Moving on to our next contender, the PS5 Pro. Does this professional console need a huge jump in GPU power to take advantage of these AI upscaling techniques? Comparing our GPU of the base PS5, we have another AMD Radeon GPU with 10.28 Tflops. That's a good amount of flops if that's our baseline. The PS5 Pro, on the other hand, came in and boosted the flop factor with 16.7 Tflops. This would equate to less of a GPU upgrade we saw from the PS4 to PS4 Pro, but still a substantial upgrade nonetheless. This Pro console also saw a similar approach with the CPU, as it largely remained the same but was able to run with a higher overclock speed of 3.85 GHz compared to the base console speed of 3.5 GHz. I know, huge upgrade, right? One area the PS5 Pro does improve upon is its storage and RAM speeds. This Pro console offered a 2TB SSD. That's a whole lot of room for great games, and it also had about a 20% increase in RAM speed over its base model, using 576 GB a second speed compared to the base model's 448 GB second speeds. This was a decent upgrade and essential for that smoother gameplay the PlayStation 5 Pro was aiming for. One other feature worth mentioning is a future-proof one, and that was being capable of Wi-Fi 7. For lightning-fast wireless internet speeds and god-tier download speeds. Moving on to the next part here, because I mentioned the lack of a 4K drive on the PS4 Pro, I think it's only fair to touch on the lack of a 4K drive on this Pro console as well. In fact, it's the lack of a drive at all. The PlayStation 5 Pro is sold as a digital-only console, forcing us disc users and physical media lovers to shill out the extra cash to install a modular disc drive attachment to the Pro. Sure, it's a 4K drive, and that's all fine and dandy, but oh man, as someone who buys and loves physical media, that one hurt. Okay, so both consoles are offering a hefty bump in GPU power, with some additional overclocking bonuses. Not bad. But I think it's time we get into the real reason we would ever get these consoles, and that's to experience the best versions of our games. So let's see how the software side of things stack up with the PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 professionals. Starting off as always with our PlayStation 4 Pro. As I mentioned, this was the first time we saw the introduction of graphical modes to choose from on a console. Usually choosing between a graphics mode aiming to use the GPU power to its fullest and render games at crisp 4K or near 4K image and 30 FPS, and a performance mode with lower resolution targets but allowing some games to run with uncapped frame rates for smoother playback. At the time, this was a huge jump, and it justified my own personal purchase of a PlayStation 4 Pro all those years ago. These game modes would have to be applied to games by the developers, whether during development or via an update patch. Games that had pro patches and offered different graphic options would be the likes of 2016's God of War, you had the Shadow of Colossus remake, Rise of the Tomb Raider, Horizon Zero Dawn, and many others. Myself, I always preferred the frame rate options. While many of these games didn't always lock to 60 FPS, the option to play these games at higher frame rates immediately made it hard to go back to 30 FPS gaming. How developers would utilize the extra power of the PlayStation 4 Pro would vary, with some using those aforementioned graphics modes and others applying a one-size-fits-all patch to render games at a higher resolution with better texture quality. This was popular among a lot of the first-person shooter games that already ran at higher frame rates, games like the Call of Duty series and 2016's Doom. Other games that got these patch upgrades would be Skyrim, Red Dead Redemption 2, and Ratchet & Clank. These games look so crisp on the PlayStation 4 Pro. Of course, not all these games were actually playing at full 4K resolution, with many ranging pixel counts between 1080p HD and the full 2160 4K. Many found a sweet spot in the middle, using a technique known as checkerboard rendering. Games would run at higher resolutions, usually above 1080p, then using this checkerboard technique could further clean up the image to make it appear like a 4K image. While not AI upscaling, it is interesting that both Pro consoles use some form of rendering techniques. It should also be noted that all these games rendering at higher resolutions had a benefit even for those with a standard HD TV, as the PS4 Pro introduced a super sampling mode where the game would render at a higher resolution then downscale to the TV screen native 1080p resolution. This resulted in a sharper image even on the standard HD TV. Death Stranding on the PlayStation 4 is a great example of this, as it specifically launched with a super sample mode for those without the 4K screen, providing crisp video output. And speaking of crisp video output, let's check in with the other professional. Looking at our PS5 Pro here, this just so happens to be another complicated one. We discussed the console's AI upscaler, PSSR, and in practice, this upscaler can do amazing work. Games like The Last of Us Part 2 or God of War Ragnarok look insanely sharp while running at a locked 60 FPS. But with this AI solution, there have been some growing pains. Some games received patches using the PSSR solution and were using an early build of the AI upscaler. Because of this, certain games could actually end up being a worse experience, with graphical artifacting and screen flickering. The wonderful team at Digital Foundry covered this extensively, and what I can say is games like Jedi Survivor and Silent Hill 2 both got patches for the Pro and became worse experiences compared to playing on your base PS5. Now sure, these issues for the most part have been fixed, but both games still exhibit a bit of flicker. For anyone buying a console to get the definitive experience, this clearly was not a good look. But for all those bad examples, there are plenty of other great ones. Games like Horizon Forbidden West look absolutely stunning on the Pro, and others using the PSSR to the fullest potential and offering transformative experiences not possible on the base console. Games like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Monster Hunter World, and Assassin's Creed Shadows. These types of experiences are what the Pro was promising. While the PS4 Pro introduced the graphical options and the choices to have higher resolutions or frame rates, the PS5 Pro is trying to offer both without compromise. Of course, as we've seen early on here, there clearly was some compromises, but it is early days for this Pro console. We will continue to see how developers learn to utilize the AI upscale and how Sony will better communicate with the developers. I would say these games on PS5 Pro are at a slow start, but are certainly starting to show their benefit as more games come out with demanding ray tracing and, Unreal Engine 5 games. Having that additional GPU power and the PSSR is offering up these games with all the features and a much sharper image quality. And as someone who loves crisp image and buttery smooth gameplay, that's a big win in my books. And there's the bell closing out round 3. While these Pro consoles take a seat in their corners and recover, let's prepare for the final round, providing an overview and look at the total value proposition of these Pro consoles. The PlayStation 4 Pro came in at a different time in gaming, a more financially stable time, you could say. Releasing at $399 USD, it was the same price as the launch PlayStation 4. By this time, 2016 to be exact, most consoles would see a price reduction. Parts became cheaper, and the manufacturers figured out ways to produce the same machine for cheaper. So looking at the PS4 Pro console at its reasonable price, if you were someone getting a 4K TV, I would say it was a no-brainer move. You got a device capable of displaying 4K streaming video, and your video games never looked sharper and ran better. Without this box, you were stuck with basic 1080p gaming. And what is this? The Stone Age? The PS4 Pro was a necessary step into the 4K generation, offering gamers with graphical choices of how they wanted to enjoy their games. While the games that were updated to support the PlayStation 4 Pro ranged from minute resolution bumps to game-changing silky smooth 60 FPS gameplay, this was our first foray into a more powerful mid-generation refresh, and it was a resounding success. The PS4 Pro clearly packs a heavy punch in the value department. But what about our PlayStation 5 Pro? Oh man, the PS5 Pro. When this thing was announced with its price point, I think you could hear a pin drop. Remember when I just mentioned the PlayStation 4 generation, you would see price drops on consoles? Well, in the current reality we live in today, that no longer applies. In fact, base console prices go up depending on where you're located. As such, the PlayStation 5 Pro did not launch at the same price point as the base PS5's $499 USD price point. In fact, it was actually $699 USD. Ouchie. Ouchie indeed. And to boot, if you wanted the disc drive, it was additional monies, so this thing is definitely after your wallet. But let's not get too hung up on the price here. If you think that's too expensive, just talk to your buddy with the souped up PC rig. Let's get back to reviewing the proposed value of the PlayStation 5 Pro, and I would say this is a tougher one to answer, only because the PlayStation 5 Pro hasn't even had its first birthday yet. But I will say this, with the promise of AI upscaling and looking into the future, we know gaming is heading in this direction, using ray tracing for lighting and AI to help pick up the slack and sharpen those images up. While the PlayStation 5 Pro stumbled out of the gate with some early games not acting on the promise of fluid gameplay with perfect visuals, I believe as time goes on, the PlayStation 5 Pro is growing to prove itself worthwhile. We're beginning to see the base PS5 console struggle to achieve the frame rates we prefer, and other games are taking a big hit on image quality. So we can think of this Pro console as more of an investment into the future. Just look at games like Assassin's Creed Shadows and Monster Hunter Wilds. They play best on the Pro console, and that's all thanks to the AI upscaling. So while the value proposition may not be as transparent to the PlayStation 4 Pro, I would bet it's a console worthwhile and will slowly show more of its cards as time goes on. We even have rumors from Mr. Cerny himself discussing plans for the Pro leading into 2026. So we will see what the future brings for the PlayStation 5 Pro, but something's telling me that this Pro console may have its "I didn't hear no bell" moment. And there we have it, judges. Time to begin your deliberation. PlayStation 4 Pro or PlayStation 5 Pro? Which one do you prefer? Which one has given you the better gaming experience? Or tell me your thoughts on the whole Pro mid-cycle console refresh. Let's discuss it all in the comments, and if you like what you saw here today, then consider hitting the video with a like, as it helps push the video to more people. I definitely appreciate it. I'll catch you all in the next video, and as always, happy gaming.